Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Ultimate Sega CD review here on Player One Start. If you're just starting this series, just to let you know, there were 3 videos that preceded this one where I covered the history of the Sega CD, the hardware, and then I took a look at the launch games. If you want to go back and take a look at those, either before or after this video, the choice is up to you. I'll leave a link above my head if you want to do it now, and a link down in the description if you want to do it later. But that said, let's go ahead and start taking a look at some other games. The launch lineup really left a lot to be desired, at least for me, especially because they didn't include a Sonic game. And yes, the games we're going to cover in this video does include Sonic CD. But there is something I've always heard from people who may or may not have played the Sega CD. Whenever they criticize it, they always say, oh, it's lacking in its game library, and the only game worth playing is Sonic CD. Now keep in mind, that's not my personal opinion, you'll see that here in a little bit, but that has been the opinion I've seen reiterated several times when people talk about the Sega CD at all. So is Sonic CD really the only game worth playing? Well, let's go ahead and take a look. And just as a reminder, we're going to be looking at these games using Sega's self-defined game genres that they came out with in the 1990s. We already covered the only value disc compilations out there, so I'm going to move on to the enhanced cartridge games. These were games that were meant to be designed like a typical cartridge game, however, they would use the expanded capabilities of the Sega CD, such as using FMV or scaling and rotation effects, as well as adding a full CD quality audio soundtrack. Some of these games would be enhanced remakes of previous titles released on cartridge, and some would be unique or exclusive to the add-on itself. Let's go ahead and boot up the Sega CD and try a few of these out. Alright, so that was a lot of games, and to tell you the truth, we're not going to be able to cover all of them in this video. But to help speed things along, I'm actually not going to recover any games that I reviewed in the Ultimate Sega Genesis review. The one thing I can say that kind of sums up most of these ports to the Sega CD is that they are roughly the same game, but with minor differences, maybe some extra levels, and of course, an enhanced soundtrack. The biggest exception to this review I found was The Adventures of Batman and Robin, where the game was really completely redesigned to just be a driving game, at least in my experience. I didn't play all the way through the game, but I got about a half hour to an hour into it and didn't hit any levels that was not based on driving the Batmobile. That said, the games we are going to cover are going to be the games that are specific to the Sega CD, if not exclusive to it. Again, I've already covered Sonic CD in its own review video, so I'm not going to recover it again here. Let's go ahead and get started with a few games that are really some hidden gems of the system. The Adventures of Batman and Robin is a series of video game adaptations released between 1994 and 1995, featuring the DC comic characters of Batman and Robin, based on Batman the Animated Series, which was retitled The Adventures of Batman and Robin for its second season. These games were released for numerous platforms, with the Genesis, Game Gear, and Sega CD versions published by Sega, while the Super NES version was published by Konami, who had also published an earlier Game Boy video game based on the show. And unlike other game ports from the Sega Genesis, the Sega CD version of this game is actually entirely different from the Genesis version. The main element of gameplay in this title is a series of chase scenes involving the Batmobile and the Batplane. Between levels, the story advances through animated cutscenes that were created specifically for the game. The animated cutscenes were produced by Warner Bros. Animation. Most, if not all, of the cast from the show reprised their roles for this game, which, yes, included Mark Hamill himself as the Joker. In total, these animated segments make up about 17 minutes of the game, leading to some fans of the show to call this the lost episode of the series. In terms of graphics and sound, this game actually delivers on the promise of the Sega CD, using the scaling and rotation effects to provide almost arcade-quality pseudo-3D racing effects for the time. In terms of gameplay, for the first couple of levels, this actually isn't too bad. However, the gameplay does get very stale and repetitive very quickly. I think this game would have been better served by actually porting over the Genesis title, which is very fun, and mixing in the new driving sequences throughout that game. However, back when this game was first released, I think what would have kept motivating me to play through this game would be so I can watch those animated cutscenes of the show, only this time through my Sega CD. Overall, while I don't feel this title is an essential part of your game collection, it would definitely not be a disappointment to those who are a fan of Batman the Animated Series around this time. Android Assault: The Revenge of Barry-Arm is a shoot-'em-up game developed and published by Human Entertainment. In this game, players control the Barry-Arm through 7 shooting stages. The Barry-Arm has 4 ship speed levels and is equipped with a fully automatic shot and charge weapon. In typical shoot-'em-up style, the player can also upgrade their speed and weapons by picking up power-ups after destroying certain enemies or on-screen objects. When this game was released, it was given a negative review by GamePro, commenting that it was a decent but outdated game, especially when compared to other CD-based shooters. Electronic Gaming Monthly praised the soundtrack but criticized the graphics as being mediocre for a CD-based game. Overall, my experience was mostly similar to those reviews. It's not a terrible game and is definitely playable, but especially due to the high price to collect this game, I don't really feel it's worth it when there are better shooters to collect on this platform.
These are the golden lands of Cheshire. Lands which were secure and prosperous via the equal radiance of both the brilliant warmth of lightness and the elusive mystical darkness. But suddenly, from out of nowhere, the nightmare of those turbulent years is once again about to return, to unfold unto an entirely new, unsuspecting generation.
Dark Wizard is a role-playing video game developed and published by Sega for the Sega CD. The game takes place on a hex-style map and features turn-based tactical battle scenes. The player controls one of 4 playable characters, each with their own attributes, abilities, and available units. Upon its release, this game received mixed to positive reviews, with Electronic Gaming Monthly giving it a 7 out of 10, commenting that, "Excellent videos and battle sequences will please Sega CD fans wanting more of this type of game for the system." And I have to tell you, this game is actually pretty good, especially if you like the real-time strategy, tactical role-playing game. This one was hard to put down for me, and I would definitely recommend it if you're a fan of this genre. Dune was actually an unexpected delight for me to find on this console. This is a 1992 action strategy video game based upon the science fiction novel of the same name. Developed by Keio and published by Version Games, Dune blends adventure with economic and military strategy. Loosely following the story of the novel, the player takes the role of Paul Atreides, with the ultimate goal of driving the Harkonnen from the planet Dune, while managing spice extraction, military, and later ecology through the native Fremen tribes. As the game progresses, the troops are equipped with better weapons, the player taps into the character's latent psychic powers, and gets better acquainted with the other characters. This game was originally released on the Amiga and IBM PC compatibles. It was one of the first floppy disk games to be converted to CD format. Taking advantage of the new storage space, they actually included footage from the film, as well as voice acting for all speaking roles, and highly improved 3D rendering travel sequences and location screens. This game is actually a blend of the Amiga's graphics and the extras of the PC CD versions. I have to say, I was strangely drawn into this game and actually ended up playing most of the way through it, if not completing it. This game reminds me a lot of those early point-and-click adventure games that came out on PCs in the early to mid-90s, but I think the biggest draw is the strong story. And out of the other point-and-click adventure games I've played for the Sega CD, I think this one is probably my favorite.
I'm Gurney Halleck. I've served the Atreides for a long time. I've just come into contact with the Fremen. The Fremen have always lived in the sands of Dune. They live in sieges so well hidden that no one knows exactly how many there are.
The Misadventures of Flink is a 2D side-scrolling platform game. This game was originally published in the UK for the Mega Drive, but strangely it did not receive a Genesis port, it only showed up on the Sega CD. This game received mixed to positive reviews upon its release, with some calling it a standard typical side-scrolling platformer that adds nothing new to the genre, to some calling it near perfection, and simply put, the best Sega CD action game ever made. For me personally, I think the gameplay is pretty solid. It's definitely one of the better than average platformers that I've ever played, but the biggest hindrance to getting this for your collection is going to be the price, as it is a rare title. I think this game can be better appreciated today, as this game was not as cutting edge as many people thought the game should be for the Sega CD.
Start your engines. Go!
Jaguar XJ220 is a pseudo 3D racing game released by Core Design. The game takes place in a series of championship races across 12 different countries, each with 3 races. The player starts in England but must decide which country to go to next, which costs the team various amounts of money. The player must also choose to repair damage to their car. If it is in red, it has to be repaired before continuing. This game received very much favorable reviews upon its release, and from my experience, this actually reminds me a bit of the graphics of Outrun in the arcades, and this would have been a most welcome game back in the day. However, I'm not sure this game has aged as well as other racing games of the time. This was back during the time where 3D racing games really showed the limitations of the hardware. However, there aren't very many racing games for the Sega CD, so this one is definitely worth a pickup if you want a racing game.
In the 8th year of the Keio era, Japan neared the end of its feudal period. The shogunate, facing an uprising by the anti-government movement, asked France for military help in order to suppress the rebellion.
Keio Flying Squadron is a scrolling shooter video game for the Sega CD, developed by Victor Entertainment and first published in Japan in 1993, later hitting North America and Europe in 1994. This game is characterized by its unique art style that combines Japanese culture of both ancient and modern simultaneously. The game consists of the player riding on top of Spot, who can shoot fireballs at enemies. When Spot is not firing, two smaller companion dragons appear one after the other to assist the main character. The smaller dragons shoot smaller fireballs, and can be sacrificed to do larger damage, only to reappear when the main character stops shooting. This game is yet another example of a game that is incredibly fun on the Sega CD, but will be unlikely that you can find it for your console because of how rare it is, and hence how high the price is. In fact, I believe this is the most expensive game you can get for the Sega CD, at least as of the recording of this video. Lords of Thunder is a shoot-'em-up game originally made by Hudson Soft for the Turbo CD. It eventually made its way to the Sega CD in 1995. What's unique about this game is its heavy metal soundtrack. In this game, the player takes control of the legendary knight Duran, who sets off to defeat Deroric's army in 7 different stages. The first 6 are selected in a manner similar to Thunder Force 3. Once the stage is selected, the player selects one of 4 armors based on the 4 classical elements. Choosing the correct armor for each stage will yield better and easier results. Reviews at the time were a bit mixed when this came out because it was mainly compared to the Turbo CD's edition, with many reviewers noting that this game is slightly inferior. While I can't attest to that, I can attest that the gameplay of this game is strongly addicting, and I really appreciate the aesthetic and the soundtrack. Unfortunately, again, this game is a bit on the rare side and expensive, but thankfully this game has been re-released several times, with the TurboGrafx CD edition being released on the Virtual Console for the Wii in 2008, as well as being released on the PlayStation Network. Overall, a game I would definitely recommend to those that like this kind of game.
Of all who fought, only 3 returned to tell the story. For the Black Seal holds fast, protecting mankind from certain destruction at the hand of the Overlord.
Popful Mail is a 2D platform game with several RPG elements. The plot of this game varies based on the port you are playing. However, in this game, it is set in an unnamed fantasy world. A prologue tells of a grand legend relating to 3 fallen gods of darkness known as the Masters of Evil that attempted to lay siege to the mortal plane. When the game sets off, the main character and local bounty hunter makes her rounds. Eventually, her day escalates to the point where she squares off with her bounty, and the plot takes off from there. The player can jump, attack, open doors, or treasure chests, as well as speak to another character. Eventually, the player can bring up a menu to change some of the game's attributes, including the current character's equipment, use or activate an item, read the game's status, save, load, and quit. The only RPG element that was lacking in this setup is the ability to level up your character. Upon release, the Sega CD version of this game got an average of about 7.75 out of 10. Critics especially praised the game's cinema scenes and extensive voice acting. I didn't really get too much into the story of this game, but I did enjoy the gameplay elements. It offers a playstyle that I really like out of action RPGs, while still retaining the simplicity of a 2D platformer. Again, rarity and large expense would be the only reasons why I wouldn't recommend collecting this title. Snatcher is a cyberpunk graphic adventure game that was developed and published by Konami. It was written and designed by the legendary Hideo Kojima, and was first released in 1988 for a different system. Kojima wanted Snatcher to have a cinematic feel, so the setting and story were heavily influenced by science fiction films, especially Blade Runner. This game has been discussed by critics and fans as setting the stage for Kojima's later works, and is often touted as a must-have for this system. However, due to its rarity and price, it will be a challenge getting this for your collection. I wasn't able to get too far into this game, but it was fun from when I played for it, and yes, definitely did remind me of some of Kojima's later work, while still providing me that early 90s PC adventure game kind of feel.
My name is Mika Slayton. I'm the administrative assistant and operator here at Junker headquarters. Very pleased to meet you.
Soulstar is a third-person rail shooter video game. What this offers over the other shooting games on this platform so far is its unique third-person perspective, placing the player behind the ship. This game received mixed reviews upon its release, but it reminded me a lot of Galaxy Force on the Sega Genesis, and that game was actually not too bad. The gameplay here can get a little bit repetitive, but I think the real draw to this game is going to be the impressive graphics and sound that was accomplished on the Sega CD. The Sega CD version of the Terminator is actually an entirely revamped game than the cartridge version. This game is noteworthy for its extensive musical score that is actually pretty darn good. The gameplay here is actually very addicting as well, and I would definitely recommend this to those of you that like shooter games similar to Contra. My only criticism of the game is that it does seem a bit dark, and I think that was an intentional art decision because the Terminator itself is a pretty dark film, but it also could be due to limitations of the color palettes in both the Sega Genesis and the Sega CD. Overall, I would recommend this game as one of those that you should not miss on the Sega CD. So it appears that the Sega CD's library is a bit more expanded than just Sonic CD. There are a lot of great games on this system. It's just like every other console. There's going to be games that are good, there's going to be games that are bad too. The other point that I see people make when they talk about the game library on here are that most of the games released for the system were full motion video games, and all of those are just bad, just because they're full motion video games. And in the next video in this series, we are going to take a look at those full motion video games, and we're going to see if all of them were indeed bad, like a lot of people seem to say. So stay tuned for that video coming to you real soon. And if it's already out, look for a link at the end of this video or in the description below. That said, everyone, remember, if you like what you see, please hit that like button, leave a comment below and let me know what you liked about today's video. Also, let me know what your experiences are with the Sega CD. Did I cover any of your favorites? If not, let me know what games I missed down below as well. I'd really like to try them out and get to know this system a little bit better. As always, I want to thank you all so much for watching. Stay tuned because I have more content coming, and I'll see you in the next one. If you like this video and you'd like to help out with future projects on this channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Also, if you enjoy the content of this channel, please remember to click on this subscribe button. Again, I want to thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.